From the second floor of the Duncan Student Center, we welcome you to another edition of Shamrock Sports. It's week 2 of the college football season, first home game of the year for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I'm Andrew McGuinness alongside JJ Post and John Bailey. Guys, a lot to talk about for Notre Dame going forward, but first we have to look back, of course, at what was a hard-fought but ultimately disappointing outcome against the Ohio State Buckeyes last weekend, with the Irish falling 21-10. And I want to start off today's show by playing a game that I don't know if you guys ever played this much, but I know this one distracted me on countless car rides when I was a kid. A little bit of I Spy. So let's start with JJ here. What's one big thing that you noticed during the Ohio State game?
John can attest. We did some of this on the long drive back to Columbus. But I spied a Jarrett Patterson-less offensive line. This is not a long-term problem for Notre Dame. Let's be clear. Jarrett Patterson is back in line for Marshall, and that is a big thing on many fronts. For one, experience. This was a game in which Notre Dame had to take on a rough, hostile environment. And you see here, the offensive line, I don't think was exactly ready for that moment without Patterson's leadership, without his vocal presence. You see here, Buckner is able to get that ball off, but not always do you happen to have a 6'4", 265-pound iron giant at tight end in Michael Mayer. You don't always get that luxury. And you're going to see here, just another play where the pocket collapses, Buckner is not really sure where to go with it, and in a big play, 3rd and 10 in the 4th quarter, he gets sacked. That's the kind of play that we know the talent is there on the offensive line. We know between Fisher, Alt, Patterson, there are first-round picks all over the lot. But without Patterson's leadership, without that vocal presence in that hostile crowd, I think the line was a little more rattled, a little easier susceptible to blitz packages. I think, there were plays where Notre Dame really would have benefited from not just having a talented player, Jarrett Patterson, on that line, but also a vocal leader. And I think if you're Notre Dame, you're getting him back, and I think you're excited to have him back because he's a talent, but I think you're more excited to have him back because he adds some experience, he adds some seniority to that young line.
Yeah, you could have used Mr. Miyagi last week. Give, Patterson the little massage he needed to come back, but hopefully they got him on the sideline for this game in case he gets hurt.
Yep, and John, your thoughts on the Ohio State game? What's your big takeaway?
So I'll tell you what I didn't see, right? And that is a rattled, true sophomore quarterback playing in what is considered one of the most hostile environments in all of college football. What I do spy is a cool, calm, collected TB12, Tyler Buckner. And I'm telling you, gentlemen, we best break out those CT scans, because you just know he's got that dog in him. Tyler Buckner in the first half was 8 of 8 for 128 yards and no interceptions. He minimized mistakes, which is what Notre Dame needed to stay in the game. But what I was most impressed by was his pocket presence. It's something that really stood out to me on the tape in high school for such a young quarterback who really hasn't gotten a lot of playing time. In the very first scoring possession of the Irish's game, Notre Dame was getting attacked from all sides. The offensive line was falling through. Tyler Buckner, he stepped up into the blitz, was hit as he threw, and delivered a strike to Lorenzo Styles for 54 yards that set up the field goal. On the first play of the second quarter, you could hear the crowd noise just barreling down onto Tyler Buckner in the offense. 3rd and 2, what's he going to do? Momentum seems to be shifting towards Ohio State. He walks up to the line, he barks out an audible, and it ends up turning into a 31-yard Matt Salerno play that once again sets up a score for the Irish. Absolutely great performance from Tyler Buckner. We talk about the second half. I blame that more so on Tommy Rees's conservative play calling. I want to see Tyler Buckner get out there and absolutely feast on the Thundering Herd this weekend.
Certainly a lot to talk about with the Irish offense, but I think the Notre Dame defense, not being talked about maybe as much as they should be in wake of this Ohio State game. And the big thing that I spied from week 1's game was a very solid Notre Dame secondary. You go back to Marcus Freeman's first game as Notre Dame head coach when the Irish fell apart, especially in the second half against Oklahoma State. It was primarily through the air, but the Notre Dame secondary in this game held up very well. Now, obviously, there were some caveats. Yes, the Ohio State Buckeyes did lose their all-star receiver and Jackson Smith-Njigba for most of the game, but this is still a very talented Ohio State receiver room featuring, the likes of an NFL Hall of Famer and Marvin Harrison and some incredible talents. But this Notre Dame secondary really held up. They avoided the big play all night long. And you look at the times when Notre Dame, the moments where they lost the game, it wasn't when they were playing coverage. That second touchdown for Ohio State was off the double safety blitz when they weren't playing traditional coverage. And then, you look at the third touchdown, that was basically just Ohio State running the ball through the Notre Dame defense. So really, the Irish secondary held up about as well as you could have expected in week 1. And I think that's something to be really optimistic about for the Irish going forward.
Clarence Lewis Redemption Tour.
Yes. Tracy Redemption Tour. Everyone's redeeming themselves. We're back.
Let's go. All right. So from Notre Dame football, let's go to a little bit of a different action this one. Our own Chloe Stafford has a segment on what you need to know about what's been going on in the U.S. Open.
Hello, Irish fans. Here at Shamrock Sports, we talk about football, basketball, and all other kinds of things. Today, we have tennis, and specifically the U.S. Open. The U.S. Open has brought us some monumental playing on both the men's and women's sides in the singles and doubles tournaments. This includes the greatest of all time, Serena Williams, who played her very last professional match in the U.S. Open tournament. Williams lost to Tom Lajovic in the third round of the tournament. Williams' powerful playing style would be missed, but she leaves with 23 Grand Slam single titles, which is more than any man or woman during the Open era. Although there have been many ups and downs throughout the tournament, the women's finalists have finally been decided. Number 1 ranked Iga Swiatek will take on number 5 ranked Ons Jabeur. Swiatek has been dominant as the world's top player this year, reeling off 37 straight wins at one point and winning 6 titles. On the men's side, there are 2 semifinal matches happening today. Currently, as we speak, the surprise star, Karen Khachanov, who is ranked number 27th, is taking on Casper Ruud. The winner of that will take on the winner of the 7 p.m. final tonight. In this round, number 3, Carlos Alcaraz will take on American favorite Frances Tiafoe. Tiafoe has already beat Rafael Nadal and Rublev, and if he continues with this success, he can become the first American man in nearly 20 years to win the U.S. Open. The women's singles finals will be Saturday at 4 p.m., and the men's will be Sunday at 4 p.m. Until then, watch some of the men's singles semifinals today. And, as always, go Irish.
Thanks very much, Chloe. Well, we're obviously just talking about Notre Dame football, of course, and some big news in college football recently that's going to affect not just Notre Dame, but really the entire landscape of the sport, with college football deciding that it's going to expand its playoff from 4 teams all the way up to 12 by at least 2026, potentially as early as 2024. And this could mean a lot of things for Notre Dame, but I think it's best that we go back and look what Jack Swarbrick, Notre Dame's athletic director, had to say the last time the college football tournament postseason experience expanded, back when it went from just a 2-team national championship game to a 4-team playoff. This interview is from about 2012 or so, and it's definitely going to give us some stuff to talk about with how the playoff is looking to shape up going forward.
Well, it makes it easier. There's no question. There are versions of the postseason that could have emerged, which would have made it more difficult. So it's not the only factor that will determine our future, but it's a really important one. As I've said all along, that was one of the factors that were critical to us. And this outcome doesn't create any momentum or incentive for us to move away from independence.
All right, guys, your thoughts on what Jack Swarbrick had to say there, and also just the entire, expansion of the college football playoff in general.
I guess to start with me, I always think that Jack Swarbrick is one of the best athletic directors in all of college. I think that you could honestly, give him a little crystal ball right there, put the little Swami hat on him, because he always seems to be able to predict the future and stay ahead of the game. I really think that he knows what he's talking about, and you can see that again with some of his comments recently about, wanting to join the Big Ten or potentially one of the super conferences, that he's completely committed to staying independent, and that's largely due to the fact that with a 12-person playoff, Notre Dame doesn't need to play in one of these conferences. They can stay independent and still put together an impressive enough resume to remain in that top 12 and have a shot at the national title. I think that this basically guarantees the playoff for Notre Dame every single year. And I know, I could be getting ahead of myself. This is going to be a bad take people play back in 10 years when I'm, announcing Sunday Night Football on ESPN or whatever. But
That's a prediction.
right? But, we see before, like Nebraska in the 90s. Whoever thought Nebraska would be where they are today. I'm hoping that doesn't happen to Notre Dame. Well, Iowa fans don't have a lot to be talking about after scoring 7 points on 2 safeties. But really, I think the way the program is set up right now just continues. It's going to be a positive feedback loop. Notre Dame makes the playoffs. That drives recruits to come here, and then they make the playoff again because they have good players. We've seen that with Alabama. We've seen that with Georgia. That's just going to continue with making it easier to make the playoffs and make it easier to get good players.
Yeah, Jack Swarbrick has a uniquely hard job as an athletic director in the sense that he both holds a massive amount of power. No other individual athletic director in the country, at least from a college football standpoint, holds the amount of power Jack Swarbrick does. Notre Dame is the eternal bargaining chip between this SEC, Big Ten proxy war going on, and he also has to deal with being an independent himself and kind of leveraging that power to get really solely Notre Dame's interest because no other school, because their own conferences, have the same interests as Notre Dame. So he has a uniquely difficult hand to play in this negotiation. I think he did pretty much exactly what he wanted to do. He went in, he got a 12-team playoff, which pretty much barring a very bad year, guarantees Notre Dame a spot in the playoff. And also, I think, for me, let us dispel this notion that a 12-team playoff is bad for the sport. This is good for the sport. You want to talk about parity. Bad news. Back when we had 2 teams left, there were 2 good teams in college football anyway. Now that we have 12 teams, people are like, oh, we're going to see 9-3 Wake Forest in the playoff. To that I say, that is good. I want to see more random teams left. I want to see a 10-2 Northwestern team that averages 17 points a game play Alabama. Will they win? Almost certainly not. Will they have a chance to make some fans from Northwestern happy? Yes, they will. Go Cats in solidarity. Go Irish in the sense that this is actually good for Notre Dame because, back on point here, Notre Dame is a program that should always be in the top 12. That is a baseline expectation for Notre Dame if they're having an acceptable year. And I think for a 12-team playoff, if they can get in that spot, they'll be in a position to host a home game, which for me was the more important part of this. I think home playoff games, the chance to have atmospheres of these games. Because I think one of the things that really killed the 14 playoffs excitement, like people kind of got bored of it. And I think one of the reasons was you were trying to make the Rose Bowl a playoff game, which, like, sure, in theory, it makes sense. The Rose Bowl is an iconic venue. The Rose Bowl is a venue everyone loves to see. But it doesn't give you the same atmosphere because you can't have students in there. You can't have fans, traveling. The Ohio State game was fun because we had, 1,000 Notre Dame fans travel down. If you put these atmospheres into stadiums where teams know they are 1 win away from making the playoff, teams know they can personally yell their lungs out and help their team get into that, promised land, I think that's going to make the atmosphere so much better. I think it's going to make the sport so much better. I'm really excited to see, what it looks like when LSU has to go up to Camp Randall in Wisconsin. Let me, and listen, this is not going to be an SEC doubter account. I'm not going to be like the SEC stinks, all that. But I am genuinely going to be interested to see, does it change things? If you make Auburn travel up to Michigan in December, does that change the way they play? Who knows? But it's a good thought experiment.
They never play up north.
Exactly. Listen, and I'm not. Once again, we're not calling the SEC Cupcake. Well, let's not. You can't put me on Saturdays down. You can't put me on Saturdays down south. None of that. But it's going to be fun to see. Make Florida come up and play in 10-degree weather. Make them see some, Scotties with their shirts off as the snow comes down and see how they react. Let's find out. It's good for the sport.
Let's find out. You said it, JJ, and we will find out in a couple of years, of course. But for the moment, let's find out what Notre Dame other fall sports teams are doing. With Jake Irons giving us another one of his fall sports updates.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the second floor of the Duncan Student Center. I'm Jacob Irons, and we're so happy to kick back off with another fall sports recap. So let's first get it started with volleyball. Volleyball went on the road for the first time under Salima Rockwell as they traveled to California to take part in the Long Beach State Invitational. On Friday, they opened up their road contests on the 2022 season against Boise State Broncos. They would ultimately fall 4-1. They would pick up the second set. Leading the way in the contest in kills was Lucy Trump. She picked up 13. Close behind her was another freshman, Avery Ross, with 12 kills. Volleyball would look to try and rebound as they played the host Long Beach State. Ultimately, Notre Dame would fall in 3 straight sets to the Big West Conference team. Once again, leading the way was freshman Lucy Trump with 12 kills. The Irish kept close in every set but could never get over the hump as the Beach would continue to pull away late in sets. Salima Rockwell continues to try and find a rhythm of her team. And right now she's been looking to those freshmen in Avery Ross and Lucy Trump like we talked about. And a big reason why right now is because she only returns 2 key starters in Hattie Monson and Lauren Tarnoff. The volleyball team continues to try and figure themselves out as they go to Norfolk, Virginia to take part in the Quest for the Queen Championship at Norfolk to take on Eastern Carolina, Old Dominion, and Navy this weekend. And now let's take a little running into the action as we'll team up with the cross-country team as they went down to Valparaiso to kick things off. Team opened their season at the Winrow Valparaiso Open last Friday. On the men's side, Isaiah Sturry kicked off the results by taking first place with a time of 17:52. Carter Chessman finished with a time of 17:52. Right behind him, had to go down to the nanosecond to find out that he was just behind Sturry. Cozen and Coleman finished 17:59 and then 17:59 respectively as well. On the women's side, Caitlin Ryan took second place overall with a time of 18:10. Sophie Novak, the sophomore, crossed the finish line for third place with a time of 18:16. Charlotte Turson finished the course with a time of 18:22. The cross-country team will get back in action on September the 16th as they host the National Catholic Invite Pillar in NCAA cross-country. That will happen over at Warren as they host one of their multiple cross-country invitationals on the year. That's going to do it for this fall sports recap. On the second floor of the Duncan Student Center, I'm Jacob Irons. Now, let's send it back to the desk.
All right, guys, so we've talked about a lot already. We talked about going back to the Ohio State game, looking at that. We looked forward a little bit with the college football playoff. Let's focus, though, on the here and now. Notre Dame Marshall tomorrow afternoon at Notre Dame Stadium. It is officially a sellout, just announced before we came on the air about an hour or so ago. A sellout for the debut of Marcus Freeman. A lot to watch for in this game. JJ, what are you going to be looking at in this Notre Dame Marshall matchup?
I'm looking to Audra Gesme because you want to talk about players that have that dog in them. Audra Gesme has that dog certified because this is a guy, you want to talk about just, when you think of a running back, fullback hybrid, Audra Gesme is your guy. He's massive. I don't know if anyone's ever seen him in person. This guy runs through people. He can run over people. He is just a person who I think had a lot of plays where, the stat sheet didn't necessarily indicate just how good he was because he averaged, I think, 3 yards a carry. But there were plays where he was getting hit 3 yards in the backfield and was making a 3-yard gain out of those. So you see here, he's got that agility to him. He can go over the pile, but he also just has that brute strength. I think running behind, a more gelled offensive line's going to help him. I think playing against, defenders that aren't all, elite prospects will help him. I expect him to be a player that's going to break out this year for the Fighting Irish. And I think this is going to be his coming out party as he continues to run over, through, and around everyone in that Thundering Herd defense.
I love that prediction because for me, power backs are the most exciting. It's nice if you do a little bit of dancing around on the sidelines, make a guy miss. But if you can just lower your shoulder,
no nonsense
and
football,
drive guys back, that's what I like to see.
Big Ten in spirit, not allegiance.
That's how I feel. That's exactly how I feel. I think the offensive line is going to be the key towards SMA being good. As you said, he averaged 2.5 yards per carry, something around that mark. But it's impressive when you realize he's getting hit at the line of scrimmage and somehow churning his feet to somehow get 9 feet past that. So the fact that he's able to do that with nothing at all, if you give him at least a little bit of a push, imagine it'll be off to the races for him. And that doesn't even, start to talk about Diggs and Tyree, who could be more than capable on their own. I really look at the right side of the line as being very disappointing. As we saw, they were, in my opinion, the most lackluster part, which I don't understand because that's not where Patterson was missing. He's missing on the left side. Blake Fisher and Josh Lugg looked lost out there, especially Lugg. And I just am baffled by that. We brought Harry Heastan back, and I know he's not going to be able to impact the team right away, but still, the fact that the team looked so lost out there, missing blocking assignments, and Blake Fisher, who's expected to be, top 15, top 10 pick in the NFL draft, well, he was better than Lugg. For someone who's marked as the next great tackle, this next great pass rusher, he was consistently getting beat by Ohio State. But I think that, like you said, a bit of more of a cupcake pass rush with the Thundering Herd this week. They don't really have a lot of the same talent as Ohio State. They should be able to get that push, and I'm just looking for them to work on gelling, more cohesion, being able to shout at, hey, double this guy, watch the blitz, this linebacker's coming, just to work mentally. Because I think outside of quarterback, offensive linemen are the most mentally capable and smartest players out on the field. They got to work on that mental game this week, and I think Marshall's the perfect way to do that.
Well, the Irish offensive line certainly getting some more experience working together, and someone who's going to get some more experience this week, of course, making his first home start at Notre Dame Stadium is going to be Tyler Buckner. You talked about him a lot earlier in the show, John, and I agree with you. I thought he was very good in the first half of the Ohio State game. I mean, how could you not with the way he started throwing the ball? 8 for 8. Obviously led Notre Dame on the 2 scoring drives very early in the game. That's the play you alluded to earlier, where he gets hit but makes a very strong throw on the outside to start the game. I do think we did see a little bit of the youth and the inconsistency that comes with that, of course. You're obviously not expecting Tyler Buckner to be perfect, but he did get a little bit lucky at some times. Obviously, this throw to Matt Salerno, it's not a bad thrown ball at all, but obviously a little bit fortunate to come away with such a crazy completion there. And then the very next play, a very solid design by Tommy Reese, and this one, the little fake pitch over the middle. A solid catch made there, a ball that's not thrown terribly, but could be a little bit better. Buckner was solid against Ohio State, but there is some room for growth. And I think that's really going to stand out in juxtaposition to Marshall's quarterback, who is a 5th-year senior, a Texas Tech transfer named Henry Colombi. So obviously coming from Texas Tech. He's played against Power 5 teams before, which Notre Dame essentially is, even though they aren't in a conference. And he was outstanding in his Marshall debut, 24 for 26 with a touchdown pass in a romping of Norfolk State. Obviously, not the strongest strongest competition, but looked very much the part of a very solid quarterback and someone who has the composure, who has that veteran experience that, you know, even against a really good team like Notre Dame, might be able to stand in there for at least a little bit and make the Irish sweat just a bit. So I think the quarterback comparison definitely going to be something to keep an eye on in this game. And something else to keep an eye on, one of our Shamrock Sports crew members has a segment coming up about what to watch across the sports landscape this week.
Welcome into our inaugural edition of Watching the Weekend on Shamrock Sports. I'm Tyler Reedy, here to bring you the very best of the next 3 days in sports.
Let's start with a dive into the college football landscape. Will the top-ranked Alabama Crimson Tide visit the Longhorns of Texas in a clash of gridiron blue bloods? This is the first regular season matchup between Bama and UT in exactly 100 years. 24th-ranked Tennessee is off to a hot start, but 17th-ranked Pittsburgh is ready to party hard at home again after beating West Virginia in a backyard brawl classic. The 69th edition of the Cy-Hawk game heads to Kinnick Stadium as Iowa seeks a 7th consecutive victory over the Cyclones of Iowa State. Kentucky is ranked 20th a week into the season, but Florida jumped all the way from unranked to number 12 after toppling Utah last Saturday. This top 20 matchup in the Swamp is the perfect way to start SEC play. Two future Irish opponents go toe-to-toe this week, as Lincoln Riley leads USC up the coast of California for a primetime matchup with Stanford. And in another showdown of ranked teams, number 9 Baylor heads into the mountains for a battle with number 21 BYU, after the two teams put up a combined 119 points in Week 1. The NFL will be out in full force with 14 Week 1 matchups on Sunday. Green Bay and Minnesota will renew an NFC North rivalry, as both squads have their sights set on a division title. The Raiders and Chargers play the final game of the 2021 season, and they'll meet again this week with hopes of dethroning Kansas City in the AFC West. And speaking of the Chiefs, last year's AFC Championship qualifiers will be at Arizona this week, as superstar quarterbacks Patrick Mahomes and Kyler Murray face each other for the first time. And on Sunday Night Football, Tom Brady and the Bucs visit Dak Prescott and the Cowboys after playing a Game of the Year candidate on opening night last season. The MLB playoff push is heating up, and the Rays are now just 4.5 games back of the Yankees, who boast a 55 home run hitter in Aaron Judge. Atlanta and Seattle bring 3 rookie phenoms together, as the Braves' Vaughn Grissom and Michael Harris, along with the Mariners' Julio Rodriguez, each have an OPS north of 800.
That'll do it for this week's segment. I'll now send it back to Andrew McGuinness and the guys in the studio.
All right, thanks very much, Tyler. So, guys, the moment we've all been waiting for. When the dust settles tomorrow, what's the final score going to look like?
Last week, we had a first at my time in NDTV history. We had people predict Notre Dame to lose the game. Good news. That's over. In the words of the great Ric Flair, we are going to be more obnoxious, more overbearable, and you are all going to learn to love it. And Notre Dame will win this game 34-10 because, frankly, if we lose this game, we have bigger problems than our desks by us.
Yeah, I know. Jake Irons, our beloved director, said we would lose by 35.
Good teams win. Honestly, great teams cover.
That's true. I'm not saying we're going to win by 35, but I do think we're going to win by 27, 37-10, because our front seven was a little lackluster against Ohio State. You can chalk that up to the offensive line being better than we anticipated. No excuses against Marshall. They lost 3 of their 5-year starters to last season, and Henry Colombi does not faze me in the slightest. He did play well, but it was against a nobody team. He still took 2 sacks. 2 sacks, this man.
The Mickey Mouse allegations have been broached for the first time this season. Oregon, we're coming for you next.
Yeah. So I think that he does not handle pressure well. He sits in the pocket for far too long, and I think he's just going to get absolutely eaten alive by Riley Mills and Isaiah Foskey. On the offense, I think it's going to be, the offensive line is going to get their push. Good tune-up game for them. We're going to see Audra Gesme just absolutely tear them up. Over 100 yards rushing. And I want to see the freshman in. Let Tobias Merriweather play.
Jalen Sneed time. Let him cook.
Yeah, I was just going to say, let Tyler Buckner cook.
Let everybody cook.
Right? Let Tyler cook.
Call it the South Dining Hall.
They can probably cook better than SDH.
Probably.
All right, I'm going to go very slightly closer than both of you guys. I don't know, maybe just the host role is just a little bit more negative this year.
A little more neutral, perhaps, actually.
Yeah, maybe. I'm going to go 30-14 Notre Dame. I feel like this is the type of game where Notre Dame could maybe start a little bit slow. I know know that's something the coaching staff has been working on with their practice. That was something they emphasized big coming into Ohio State, and they did have a pretty good job in the first like 20 minutes, 30 minutes or so of that game. But, you know, first home game, the emotions are going to be high for everyone, especially for Marcus Freeman. And, you know, obviously, like, the expectations are so high, you know, and there's, like, a little bit of pressure, I think, because, you know, you lose the first 2 games of your coaching career, you're like, all right, it's against Oklahoma State and Ohio State. Certainly understandable losses. But, you know, there's almost, like, a little bit of, like, pressure, you know, to just destroy Marshall right out of the gates and just get it over with. I think they might hang in there for just a little bit, but I think the Irish are going to pull away. They wind up winning by, I guess, technically 2 scores, but close to 3 scores, basically. And I'll say they get the job done, really pulling away in the third quarter. So
Just got to put their foot on their neck. I do not want to see us coast in the second half. I just want to see us play like Alabama does, who does not stop scoring. What did they win against? 55-0 Utah State?
I believe so.
Yeah, if we
Listen,
don't win by that.
Ohio State failed to cover against us. We have the same spread this week against Marshall. That is an insult, and we should be treating it as such. Win by 18.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we're going to call it a show. For John Bailey and JJ Post, I'm Andrew McGuinness. Enjoy the first home football week of the season. We'll see you back here next Friday.